That's the truth. When I asked her to come over, it was because she'd helped me out earlier that week. Drove across town with jumper cables when my car gave up in the middle of a grocery parking lot. I told myself dinner was just my way of saying thanks. But even then, I knew it wasn't that simple. She wasn't just family in the technical sense. Cousin sounds casual, distant, like someone you see once every couple of years at a wedding. But she wasn't that. She was the kind of cousin you actually grew up knowing. Older, steady, the one who always seemed a step ahead of you in life. When she knocked on the door, my apartment felt too small all at once. Too plain. I saw her standing there with a bottle of wine tucked against her side. Hair pulled back like she'd been busy all day, but still carried herself as if she owned the space around her. She was in her 40s, but you wouldn't notice age first. You noticed the way she looked at you, as though she was taking in details you didn't even know you had. Smells good, she said, stepping in. It's just pasta, I admitted. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. The kitchen was cramped, and while I stirred the sauce, she leaned against the counter, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume. Something subtle, not sweet. More like the kind of scent you don't forget after brushing past someone in a hallway. We talked about work, about the weather turning colder, about my car still making a noise even after the jump. She laughed at how I imitated the sound, that low grinding hum. And for a second she touched my wrist without thinking, steadying me as I flailed my arms for effect. The touch barely lasted, but it was enough to send my words off track. You still do that thing, she said. What thing? Talk with your hands when you're nervous. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I wasn't nervous, but my face gave me away. I busied myself pouring water, just to avoid her eyes. Dinner stretched longer than it should have. She ate slowly, listening more than she talked, asking questions that made me talk too much. About books I'd been reading, people I'd lost touch with, half-formed plans I hadn't told anyone else. And she didn't just nod. She listened, leaned in, tilted her head slightly like she was weighing every word. At one point, she caught me staring at her glass, the red stain of wine near the rim. She raised an eyebrow, not in judgment, but like she'd caught me stealing something small. I looked away, pretending to be interested in the chipped corner of the table. Later, while I was putting plates in the sink, she wandered to the bookshelf against the wall. Her fingers moved over the spines, stopping at a novel I'd left half-read. She pulled it out, flipped a page, and said quietly, "You never finish the ones that matter most." I didn't have an answer for that. I just stood there, holding a wet plate, the faucet running too loud in the silence. She closed the book and looked at me. No smile, no teasing, just that steady, unreadable gaze. The kind that makes you feel seen in a way you didn't ask for. And that's the part one can't shake. The way she looked at me like she knew something I didn't, and how I caught myself not wanting her to leave at all. A week after that dinner, I found myself at her place. She'd called asking if I knew anything about fixing a leaky faucet. I didn't, not really, but I said yes anyway. Her house felt different from mine. Warmer. Lived in. Family pictures lined the hallway, the frames slightly uneven, as if she'd put them up herself without bothering to measure. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, but underneath, there was something else, like old wood that held memories. She led me into the kitchen, where the sink dripped in stubborn rhythm. "I'm sorry to drag you into this," she said, folding her arms. "I just couldn't get around to calling someone." I shrugged, kneeling by the cabinet. "It's fine. I needed something to do anyway." From the corner of my eye, I could see her leaning against the counter again, just like she had in my apartment. But this time she was quieter, guarded. She answered when I asked where the wrench was, but her voice carried a distance, like she was only half here. The faucet resisted every twist I gave it. My hand slipped, the metal biting into my skin. She crouched down suddenly, close enough that her shoulder brushed mine. She reached in, steadying the fixture with her hand. "Here, like this," she murmured. Her hand was warm, small lines running across her knuckles. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her nails were short and neat, like she'd been too busy to bother with polish. Our eyes met, just for a second. She pulled back quickly, as if the moment had been a mistake. "Sorry," she said, standing too fast. I should let you work. But I couldn't unsee it. The flicker of vulnerability. Not the confident, composed woman she showed everyone, but someone a little tired, a little raw underneath. The job took longer than it should have, mostly because I kept sneaking glances at her. She busied herself wiping the counter that was already spotless, straightening a stack of unopened mail, moving the same mug from one spot to another. Her laugh came suddenly when I finally got the faucet to stop dripping, softer than usual, almost surprised. You actually did it, she said, shaking her head. I didn't think you could. Neither did I admitted. Her smile lingered only a moment before fading. She pressed her lips together, as if swallowing words she couldn't say. Then she leaned back against the counter, her hands gripping the edge behind her. It struck me how tired she looked then, not in her face, exactly, but in her posture. Like she carried weight no one else noticed. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the silence between us was too thick. Instead, I set the wrench down and wiped my hands on a towel. When I looked up, she was watching me. Not smiling, not guarded, just watching, like she was caught between letting me in and keeping me out. And in that quiet, her eyes held me longer than they should have. Rain was already sliding down the windows when she called. You left your wrench here, she said, almost apologetic. If you need it back, stop by. I told myself it was just about the wrench, but when I walked into her living room that night, the storm outside felt like an excuse neither of us had named. The lamps were dim, a blanket draped across the couch. She wore a loose sweater, sleeves pushed up, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look more tired than she probably wanted me to notice. We sat with mugs of tea neither of us drank much of. The rain kept filling the silence for us, steady and insistent. At some point, she laughed about something I said, too loudly, maybe, and covered her mouth, embarrassed. The sound stuck with me. It wasn't her polished laugh, the one she used around family or friends. It was softer, unguarded. Why are you always looking at me like that? She asked suddenly. My heart stumbled. Like what? Like I've got spinach in my teeth, or, I don't know. Like I'm a puzzle you're trying to solve. I wanted to tell her she was right, that I couldn't stop noticing things. The way her hand brushed over the rim of her cup, the faint scar near her wrist, the way her voice thinned when she was tired. But the words stuck somewhere in my throat. Instead, I said, maybe you are a puzzle. She held my gaze too long after that. Something flickered there, doubt, maybe, or recognition, and she shifted closer, not much, just enough that I felt the warmth radiating between us. The air hummed with the possibility of something more. Then her phone rang. She jumped slightly, pulling it from the cushion beside her. Her voice dropped when she answered, calm but careful. I caught only fragments. No, it's fine. I told you, I don't need. I looked away, giving her space, but every word pressed against me like a door I wasn't supposed to open. When she hung up, she didn't explain. She just set the phone face down on the coffee table and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The silence after was heavier than the rain. You okay? I asked quietly. She nodded too quickly. Yeah, just people worrying too much. I wanted to push. I wanted to ask who it was, why her voice had changed. But I didn't. I stayed still, aware of how close we were, how her knee brushed mine under the blanket. The storm outside swelled, thunder shaking the windows. She flinched, then laughed at herself for flinching. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand hovering over hers, almost touching, almost crossing that line. She didn't move. She just looked at me. And then, just as I was about to close the space, she pulled her hand back to her lap, breaking the spell. I sat there with the rain pounding outside, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't hesitated. The storm passed overnight, but it left the world gray and heavy. I found myself back at her place the next afternoon, returning the wrench properly this time. At least, that's what I told myself. She was in the kitchen again, hair loose, sweater sleeves tugged over her hands as she poured coffee. She didn't look surprised to see me, but she didn't smile either. We sat at the table, the mug warm in my hands, the silence stretching long enough to make me restless. She didn't fill it. She just stared at the steam rising from her cup, lips pressed together like she was holding something back. Finally, she said. What are we doing? Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't even accusing. It was soft, almost like she was asking herself more than me. I froze. The words hung between us, and I couldn't pretend I hadn't been waiting for them. I don't know, I admitted. Her eyes flicked up, catching mine. For a moment, I thought she might laugh, dismiss it, brush the question aside. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, looking at me as if she was trying to measure the truth of me. You're too young for this, she said finally. For whatever this is, you should be out with people your age. Not here fixing faucets for me. I wanted to protest, to say I wasn't here because of a faucet, but the words jammed up inside me. My throat tightened. I don't feel young, I said instead. Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the right angle. She looked away, tapping her fingernail against the mug. The sound echoed in the stillness. For a while, we didn't speak. Just the tick of the clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the sound of her shifting in her chair. Every movement felt magnified. I don't want to ruin things, she whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear. That was the first time she said it out loud, that there was something to ruin. I leaned forward without thinking, elbows on the table. You think I don't? Her eyes snapped back to mine. The silence between us turned heavier, like the room itself was pressing down. She didn't look away this time. Neither did I. It wasn't touch. It wasn't words. It was something in the way her breath caught, in the way my hand twitched toward hers before stopping halfway. Her face softened, but not with relief. More like resignation. This isn't supposed to happen, she said. I wanted to ask, then why does it feel like it already has? But I didn't. I just sat there, memorizing the lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as though she was tired of holding herself together. The silence stretched again, unbearable now. And then, finally, she looked at me and said, in a voice that cracked the air between us, I don't know how to stop wanting this. A few days passed where we didn't see each other. I told myself it was better that way, that maybe the silence would reset things. But then she called, her voice softer than usual. Can you help me move a few boxes from the attic? It was an easy yes. Her attic was cramped, the air dusty with forgotten years. I lifted cardboard boxes while she sorted through a stack of old photo albums, sitting cross-legged on the floorboards like a kid. Sunlight cut through the single small window, catching the dust in golden strands. At one point, she stopped flipping pages. Her hand lingered on a photo. She didn't show me right away, just held it against her lap, thumb brushing the corner like it might dissolve if she pressed too hard. Finally, she turned it so I could see. A man, smiling into the camera. Broad-shouldered, warm-eyed. He stood with his arm around her younger self, both of them leaning against a car that looked older than me. This was someone I loved, she said, almost in a whisper. He died. A long time ago. The words hit me quietly but hard. She didn't look at me. She stared at the photo as if the man might answer her back. I don't talk about him, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. People move on faster than they think they should. Or they pretend to. I thought I did. But sometimes I see his face in places I don't expect. A reflection, a stranger on the street. Her breath wavered. She pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. And then she looked at me. Really looked. The weight of her gaze settled in my chest. You remind me of him. The room tilted. My hands tightened around the box I was holding, cardboard cutting into my palms. I didn't know what to say, whether it was a gift or a curse to be told that. I don't mean to put that on you, she said quickly, shaking her head. It's not fair. It's just, when you laugh, sometimes. Or the way you lean on your elbows when you're listening. It's like pieces of him I'd forgotten come back. The silence after that was different. Not heavy like before, but fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter it. I set the box down carefully and sat beside her. My shoulder brushed hers, and she didn't move away. The photo lay between us on the floor, the man's smile frozen in time. I wanted to tell her I wasn't him, that I didn't want to be a shadow of someone else. But all I could manage was, I'm here. She let out a breath, soft and shaky, and leaned the slightest bit into me. And in that moment, surrounded by dust and memories, I realized she wasn't the only one shaken. because being seen as him made me wonder if I was enough as me. The attic moment lingered in me for days. Her words, "You remind me of him," echoed every time I caught myself smiling or leaning my elbows on the table or saying something without thinking. I wanted to ask if that was all she saw when she looked at me, a memory stitched over my face. But then, she invited me again. This time, no pretense. Just, "Come by. I don't want to eat alone tonight." Her kitchen smelled of garlic and onions. She moved around the stove with ease, hair tied up, sleeves rolled to her elbows. I sat at the table, watching her like I always seemed to. "You're quiet," she said, glancing at me over her shoulder. "I'm thinking," I admitted. "About?" I hesitated. "About us." She stopped stirring for just a second, the spoon hovering over the pan. Then she set it down, wiped her hands on a towel, and came to sit across from me. Her face was unreadable at first, but her eyes carried everything she couldn't say. "This isn't simple," she whispered. "I know. You're younger." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I shouldn't want this." The honesty cut through me, sharp and soft at once. I leaned forward, searching for words, but she raised her hand slightly, enough to still me. "I don't need promises," she said. "Not from you. I just need the truth." For once, I didn't overthink. "The truth is, I can't stop coming back here, even when I tell myself I should." Her breath caught. She looked down at her hands resting on the table, the small veins visible beneath her skin, the faint tremor in her fingers. Without thinking, I reached across and placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. She didn't speak either. Just turned her hand so her palm pressed against mine, her thumb brushing the edge of my wrist. We sat like that, the room quiet except for the faint simmer of food on the stove. No declarations. No grand decisions. Just the silence we'd both been circling for weeks, finally folding in on itself. After a while, she shifted closer. Not much, just enough that the space between us felt intentional now. Her forehead leaned toward mine, hesitating until we met halfway. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't anything people would call romantic. It was smaller than that, and yet so much bigger. Her skin was warm, her breath uneven. And in that closeness, I understood, we weren't solving anything. We weren't defining it. We were simply admitting it was real. The stove clicked softly as the burner turned off on its own. Neither of us moved. And in that stillness, I knew. We had crossed a line without ever really crossing it. We stayed there, hand in hand, forehead to forehead, the world outside forgotten. And that was enough. It's strange how the smallest things stay with you. Not the storm, not the long silences, not even the questions we couldn't answer. What I remember most is her hand resting against mine, her forehead leaning gently into me, the quiet honesty of two people deciding, without words, that whatever this was, it mattered. Time has moved on since that night. We don't talk about it often, not directly. Life doesn't pause to give you neat chapters or tidy labels. But something between us shifted permanently, and I carry that shift everywhere I go. I used to think love, or whatever you call it, was about certainty, about saying the right words, making promises, putting a name to the feeling so it couldn't be lost. With her, I learned the opposite. Sometimes love isn't about naming it. Sometimes it's about sitting in the silence, letting it exist without needing to be explained. She changed me, not in the dramatic way stories usually tell it. No sudden transformation, no overnight courage. It was quieter than that. I listen differently now. I notice more. I'm less afraid of pauses. And when I look at people, I try to really see them the way she saw me that night at my kitchen table, when I didn't even know what I was giving away. And her? She'll never say it outright, but I think I gave her something too. A reminder, maybe, that she could still feel, that she hadn't shut the door completely on wanting. That even in the middle of regrets and losses, there was still space for a heartbeat that didn't to the past. We don't know where this will lead, and honestly, that's okay. Not every connection is meant to be mapped out in advance. Some are just meant to be lived, one quiet, complicated moment at a time. When I think back to the night she asked, "What are we doing?" I realize now the answer didn't matter as much as the fact that we stayed in the question together. Maybe that's what love really is, not certainty, not forever, but the willingness to sit with the not knowing. So yes, I had my cousin over for dinner, and she stayed till morning. But it wasn't the dinner or the morning that changed me. It was everything in between. The silences, the almost confessions, the fragile truths neither of us expected to say out loud. And if I've learned anything, it's that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like rain against a window, like a hand resting against yours, like two people who should have walked away but didn't. That's the story I'll never stop carrying. Sparkles, if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?